Okay, so let's talk about last week's craziness. So last week we had a whole bunch of shenanigans, of course, with Trump and tariffs, and that freaked the market out. So if we do a quick little chart review here, you can see that everything was going fine. Everything's going fine. We were bouncing along 90 grand, 90 grand, 90 grand, 95 grand through most of February. And then Trump out of nowhere, and by the way, this is where he announced we were at like 106 ish, 106, I think. And he announced tariffs on Mexico and Canada initially. That happened on a Friday. The market dumped over the weekend. In fact, you can see what happens here. So the market, here's the top, and then Trump announces tariffs. And then this is on a Friday, of course, at like basically close of business. So then the markets are shut down, and then everybody just goes to sell off their crypto. So you can see we had a 13% pullback just over that weekend until the market reopened. Then he started doing this whole shenanigan where, oh, I was just joking. That was just a bargaining chip. And then, I'm going to pause those for 30 days. We ramped back up pretty quickly, back up over 100, and then kind of went floating around. And then right about here, you can see where all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, he just announces on a Monday, yeah, actually, tariffs are going through. We're just doing that anyway. So you all can kiss my ass. And totally unexpected. Wasn't even a month later. And then boom, you can see that we just wicked all the way down to the CME gap. We had a 20% drop just from there. That was, of course, while I was trying to travel and all hell's breaking out and short term. But yeah, I mean, we had our 26% pullback from the low, like recent. Although if we go all the way to the previous top at about 109 ish, we had, let's call it roughly 30% pullback, which is right in line with bull markets. In fact, if we zoom all the way back to the summer, you can see that right after ETFs went live, we peaked, and then we had a pullback to about 33%. So that's about what we saw last time. Now, what happened was we had that pullback, market returned. Trump says, hey, I got your back. Don't worry. The strategic reserve is still going, and I'm going to include some altcoins in it. And then all of a sudden, we get this huge super ramp from 78K. In 2 days, we get a 22% lift up to 95,000. And then the next day, uh, more craziness. And yeah, then we get this drawdown of 13%. So things are getting hyper volatile. And it's very, very strange because, oh yeah, tariffs are still going in place. We get that 1 day lift, and then everybody's freaking out because on March 3rd, tariffs went into effect. And then we got this big pullback from 95 down to 81, back right up to 92. So we are just ping ponging all over the place. So this is where, specifically with Bitcoin, it pays to be a hodler, and it pays to be able to ride out kind of crazy volatility. But we did fill that CME gap. In fact, what was interesting is that on this launch, due to the Trump bump, we launched from 78 up to 95. That created the biggest CME gap in history, down around 82. We came back down and filled that right on time, popped back up to 92, and now here we are today at about 88.6. So we've had a bit of a sell-off just in the last hour or so. Not really sure what's causing that. So anyway, I'll have to check on the news. But we've just been ping-ponging around the place, and certain altcoins got smashed. What it's been interesting to see is if we look at Bitcoin dominance, this thing just continues to just rule the day. In fact, if we look at from the previous drop all the way down, that was bull market of 2021, flat across, and then really during this bull run, it's just been, the story has been Bitcoin. It's been Bitcoin to Bitcoin ETFs. And so far, this is the furthest it's been in this market cycle of the last year of Bitcoin dominance being this high. This has never happened before. Because if you look at this, we're now in March of the final year, we're at 61%. If we look at March of 2021, we were like 58 and dropping fast. As a matter of fact, let's go back. Maybe I'm wrong. So March of 21. Okay, I take it back. We were right at this point, although we had started much, much higher. So maybe this just says the rest of the year we're going to start flying. But back in 2017, you can see that this was really, by the time we hit March, we really started cascading. So, it's kind of needing to happen now. March, April is when we should start seeing this thing drop if altcoins are going to have the face melting, ripping run that we expect. So let's talk about the strategic reserve. The big news this past week that surprised the market was Trump coming out after that big drop to the 78K CME gap and saying, we are going to do a crypto reserve. And by the way, In fact, let me back up here because there's a couple different things I'm going to do. Let's see. Well, where is this? Yeah, I'll cover it in a second. So basically what happened was Trump came out and said initially, hey, we're going to do a crypto reserve, but we're also going to put in Solana, an American made, aka American made, even though there's no really such a thing with crypto because it's 24/7 worldwide. But we're going to include strategic positions in Ethereum, in Solana, in Ripple, and Cardano, which I thought was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in crypto. Uh, there's nothing strategic about that. Calculating maybe, but not strategic. So anyway, this created a big hubbub. People were surprised. You got these massive lifts on those tokens. In fact, you can see, yeah, take a look at the Cardano uh, chart here. Here's what happened. We got this big sell off, and then Trump says, hey, we're going to put Cardano in this thing. And it went from 58 cents to a buck 20. It basically doubled in like a day and a half. Pretty remarkable. It's since sold off a bit. Solana had a pump, XRP had a pump. But why in the hell would we actually do that? Well, let's talk about this. The reaction from Bitcoin land was harsh and swift. People said this is not the campaign promise you made of a strategic Bitcoin reserve at the Bitcoin conference. Why would you include this other stuff in there? Pomp actually made a pretty good point the day before. I'll skip that article, but he said there's really nothing strategic about these other cryptocurrencies. They're not commodities. They're not decentralized to the degree that Bitcoin is. So he said these are more like taking positions in a like a software company, a software play. He says, well, then if we're going to do something like include a strategic reserve of Ripple or Cardano, and I don't even know anyone who's using Cardano for anything on their chain, then why stop there? Why not own some Apple stock as the US government? Why not own some LP shares from Andreessen Horowitz? And why not, just do all these things further out on the risk curve? Right? The reason we have a strategic reserve of, let's say, oil, or even, this is surprising to me, I didn't realize the US had a strategic reserve of cheese. Yes, we have a strategic reserve of commodities like cheese, beef, pork bellies, eggs, so on and so forth. So the reaction was swift. People said, what the hell is this? And so then they kind of started couching that back. So the title here is maybe we are getting a Bitcoin only strategic reserve after all. Rumors continue to circulate about the White House Crypto Summit. By the way, I'll have a lot to say about that. Yeah, how old are those eggs? Yeah, they have to refresh those every now and then. The White House Crypto Summit is tomorrow, by the way. So expect some fireworks this weekend and tomorrow in the markets. Be careful if you're doing short-term trading. Planned for this Friday in Washington, D.C., this will be the first time industry leaders meet in a public setting with the president's working group to discuss key issues related to Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency industry. What was surprising is that more recently, Trump posted online that a crypto-related reserve would also include altcoins like Ethereum, Solana, XRP, and Cardano. The backlash on the proposed bait and switch was loud and swift. Most people in the crypto industry, including those who hold some of the altcoins mentioned, agreed the country's strategic reserve should be Bitcoin only. In fact, Pomp even said that on a podcast, is that, hey, I own some assets that will benefit from this. So I own, he owns a stock in Solana Strategies, which of course would go to the moon if they started market buying Solana at scale. But he said, I think it's a mistake. So Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick gave an interview earlier today and explicitly called out the different treatment of Bitcoin. He shared this, quote, the president definitely thinks that there's a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now, there will be the question of how do we handle the other cryptocurrencies? And I think the model is going to be announced on Friday when we do that. A Bitcoin strategic reserve is something that the president is interested in. He spoke about it all during the campaign trail. I think you're going to see it executed on Friday. So Bitcoin is one thing. And then the other currencies, other crypto tokens, I think, will be treated differently. Positively, but differently. So if the US wanted to, let's say, create a sovereign wealth fund, that's where something like that would fit. It would not fit in a strategic reserve. Now, that begs the question, they've flirted with this idea of a sovereign wealth fund. But in order to have a sovereign wealth fund, you have to have wealth. And the US doesn't. It has $36 trillion in debt. So the countries that have sovereign wealth funds actually have a positive surplus, not a massive monster, largest in human history deficit. So it's akin to having $36 trillion in debt, but then saying, hey, we should invest some money to get a return. No, you should pay your debt down first. So we'll see how this goes. But anyway, he says, in the meantime, there are a few trends worth paying attention to across the Bitcoin network specifically. Balances on exchanges continue to plummet. which suggests Bitcoin holders are unwilling to sell their Bitcoin at these levels. Of course, we have seen massive outflows of ETFs during that big drop to 78,000. In fact, we had our biggest day ever, which was a negative $1 billion ETF outflow. Those have reversed. Prices will have to substantially increase in order to unlock more liquidity from long-term holders. What could drive that substantial price increase? Overall, you can see ETFs continue to accumulate more Bitcoin regardless of price. Collective funds started at approximately 650,000 Bitcoin in ETFs in January 2024. Today, they hold nearly 1.14 million Bitcoin for various investors. So you can see, sure, we've had a little bit of a drawdown here, but really we've just seen up and to the right for the most part on people allocating into Bitcoin. So that's pretty wild. It's not just Bitcoin, or excuse me, ETFs that are buying. For example, Japan has a company called MetaPlanet. They basically were a company that wasn't doing a lot, and they decided, you know what? Let's just do the MicroStrategy thing here. And let's just start buying an absolute shit ton of Bitcoin. And you can see that started in September in earnest. They started going and issuing public debt and just buying up as much Bitcoin as they possibly could. They bought this monster dip. So they just bought 497 Bitcoin in the last 24 hours, which is interesting because it's more than 100% of all the new Bitcoin that was created yesterday on chain. So as more and more companies do this, it's going to create a flywheel effect. So anyway, this brings us back to the White House Crypto Summit on Friday. If the US announces a strategic Bitcoin reserve that includes the nation buying more Bitcoin, all bets are off on what can happen to the digital assets price. There'll be a lot of speculation between now and Friday, but something tells me we're going to get fireworks in DC to close out the week. And that could be part of why we're seeing a little bit of a pullback here. People trying to front run and then trying to hedge against tomorrow's news, because it'll be either probably a massive up or a massive down tomorrow, because we just don't know what that's going to say.
Hey, this is Brett from Moonstream. If you'd like to learn more about our pro trading signals or our live classes every Wednesday or our Retire Rich program, go over to moonstream.io/start.